By morning, my overnight bag was already packed. My knitting bag was zipped up too tight. My phone charger was gone. And then came the car ride. As we were loading in, Derek handed me that water bottle, said it again, real low, almost like he wanted me to hear it but didn't want to own it. "You're just dead weight anyway." He didn't blink, didn't even look sorry. I didn't say anything. I just watched the condensation trail down the bottle, warping my reflection. I barely recognized the face staring back. And right then, my mind drifted to the studio, to the way the morning sun used to pour through that front window, how I'd sort fabric by color, not by cost, how even the torn pieces, the frayed ones, could be stitched into something strong, if you knew how to place the needle. Something in me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just folded into myself, quiet like cloth being hemmed, like I was preparing for something later. The car pulled away. Trees blurred past the windows. I stayed quiet, my throat full of unsaid things. I just watched the pine trees grow thick, watched the cell signal vanish. They made one mistake. They forgot I still remember how to thread a needle, and every stitch, every single one, tells a story. So if you've ever sat in silence while someone you love spoke to you like you were a burden, then maybe you know that kind of quiet. It's not weakness, it's gathering. And I wonder, have you ever held your strength still just long enough to see what they'd try next? If so, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a comment. I read every one, especially on the nights when sleep won't come. And if this story feels familiar, I hope you'll stick around. There's more to tell. Next time, I'll take you deep into the woods. No signal, no noise. Just the trees and the part where everything began to shift. By morning, my overnight bag was already packed. My knitting bag was zipped up too tight. My phone charger was gone. And then came the car ride. As we were loading in, Derek handed me that water bottle, said it again, real low, almost like he wanted me to hear it but didn't want to own it. "You're just dead weight anyway." He didn't blink, didn't even look sorry. I didn't say anything. I just watched the condensation trail down the bottle, warping my reflection. I barely recognized the face staring back. And right then, my mind drifted to the studio, to the way the morning sun used to pour through that front window, how I'd sort fabric by color, not by cost, how even the torn pieces, the frayed ones, could be stitched into something strong, if you knew how to place the needle. Something in me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just folded into myself, quiet like cloth being hemmed, like I was preparing for something later. The car pulled away. Trees blurred past the windows. I stayed quiet, my throat full of unsaid things. I just watched the pine trees grow thick, watched the cell signal vanish. They made one mistake. They forgot I still remember how to thread a needle, and every stitch, every single one, tells a story. So if you've ever sat in silence while someone you love spoke to you like you were a burden, then maybe you know that kind of quiet. It's not weakness, it's gathering. And I wonder, have you ever held your strength still, just long enough to see what they'd try next? If so, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a comment. I read everyone, especially on the nights when sleep won't come. And if this story feels familiar, I hope you'll stick around. There's more to tell. Next time, I'll take you deep into the woods. No signal, no noise, just the trees, and the part where everything began to shift. Derek didn't say a single word during the drive. Brittany, on the other hand, filled the silence with these cheerful little comments about how fresh the air would be, how unplugging would do me good, how the quiet might help settle my nerves. I nodded when I needed to, but most of the time I just stared out the window as the trees grew thicker and the sky got darker. Somewhere halfway up the mountain, my phone lost signal. I didn't say anything, just slipped it into my bag. When Derek was little, he used to cry if I didn't leave the hallway light on. He was terrified of the dark. He'd tiptoe into my room in the middle of the night and whisper, "Can I sleep in your bed?" I always let him, every single time. Looking at him now, with that tight jaw and his eyes locked straight ahead, I couldn't find even a trace of that soft, scared little boy. The cabin looked like it had grown up right out of the woods. Wood shingles covered in moss, a porch that leaned like it was tired. It wasn't cute, it wasn't cozy, it just felt cold, practical. Derek jumped out before I could reach for the handle and opened my door. He said, "Watch your step, Mom." Brittany smiled like it was a performance and added, "It's rustic, but cozy. You'll love it." Inside, the air smelled like pine, damp wool, and something faintly metallic. The fireplace was empty. There weren't any photos on the walls, just a bare table, 2 chairs, and a single cot folded up in the corner. Derek pointed and said, "That's for you. We'll take the bedroom." I tried to smile. "Where's the second bed?" Brittany laughed, too lightly. "It's just a little retreat, Margaret. We figured you'd want some space." There was only one car key hanging on a nail near the door. Derek took it and slipped it into his pocket like it didn't mean anything. That evening, after they went into the bedroom, I pretended to sleep. The walls were thin, and I could hear whispering. Brittany's voice came through sharp and low. Derek answered in quiet tones. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't try. I just listened. At some point in the night, I got up to use the bathroom. On instinct, I tried the front door. The knob didn't turn. It was locked. From the outside. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, one hand on the knob, the other wrapped tight around the sleeve of my cardigan like I needed to hold on to something. The next morning, I opened the fridge. Everything was labeled. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all pre-portioned. Not just organized, planned. I stared at the labels until my eyes started to blur. Then I opened a drawer, looking for tea. I found forks, napkins, and a folder, thick, manila. Inside was my name, my prescriptions, my last physical, blood pressure readings, a copy of a power of attorney form with Derek's name signed at the bottom. My signature wasn't there. I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront them. I closed the folder, slid it back under the dish towels, and made myself a cup of chamomile. Weak, but warm. I added a little honey, like always, stirred it twice clockwise, then I wrapped my hands around the mug and just held it. Outside, fog still hung in the trees. I could hear birds somewhere out there, faint and far away. I sat by the window for an hour, sipping slow, and I started counting. Every exit, every lock, every word they said that didn't quite make sense. I wasn't scared, not yet, but I was done pretending I didn't see what was happening. The mist still hadn't lifted. It wrapped around the trees like it was holding on to secrets, and it softened every sound until even my own breathing felt too loud. No birds, no rustling, just fog and silence, thick like cotton. I moved through the kitchen slowly, pretending not to notice how Derek had left the cupboard doors half open, or how Brittany kept her phone tucked into the pocket of her robe even though there was no signal out here. They were pretending to be relaxed. I went along with it. I said, "Let me make breakfast. It'll give me something to do." Brittany raised one eyebrow, then shrugged. "Sure, eggs are in the fridge." While the water boiled, I kept my hands quiet, moving through the kitchen like I'd lived there all my life. I counted the window latches, 2 in the front, 1 above the sink. The back door had an old rusted bolt. I could tell right away it could be jimmied open with a spoon if I ever needed to. I folded some napkins from the drawer and used a little pencil stub I found near the phone jack to jot down notes. No dates, just pieces. Car key always with Derek. Door locked at night, food labeled. I slipped those notes into the bottom of my knitting bag, under the scarf I hadn't touched in weeks. Breakfast was quiet. Derek read an old magazine from cover to cover. Brittany just scrolled. No one said a word about the night before. I smiled when they looked up, poured tea like it was just a normal Sunday morning. I remembered something my mother used to say. Don't let them know you're thinking. Just keep pouring the tea. That came back to me like a bell ringing. She was always the calmest person I knew, even when Dad lost his job, even when the roof leaked, even when she had to make one pot of chicken soup stretch 4 days. She never blinked. Later in the afternoon, I asked if I could step outside for some air. Derek said, without really looking at me, "Not too far." Brittany added, "It's easy to get turned around." So I walked, slow, hands in my cardigan pockets, eyes low, like I wasn't paying much attention, but I saw everything. The car wasn't where it had been. It was parked deeper into the woods now, tucked behind a wall of ferns. No trail led to it, no keys in sight. I walked just a little farther, then turned around like I was out of breath. When I got back, the door was locked. Brittany didn't seem to remember I'd gone outside. I knocked once, then again. It took nearly 5 minutes before she finally opened it. She looked at me and said, all sweet, "Oh gosh, sorry, I thought you were napping." While I'd been standing there, the rain had started. My sweater was wet and heavy against my skin. I didn't say a thing, just stepped inside, shook off the water, and made tea. That night, after dinner, Brittany brought me my evening pills with a tall glass of lukewarm water. She said, "For your blood pressure." I smiled. Of course. When she turned away, I tucked the pills under my tongue, and later, when no one was looking, I slipped them into the tea tin on the shelf. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't scared either. I was paying attention, listening, watching the minutes, noticing the shifts in their faces. And from that moment forward, I wasn't waiting for someone to come rescue me. I was already doing it myself. By the second morning, no one asked how I slept, and I didn't bother pretending I had. Brittany slid a piece of toast onto a chipped plate without even glancing at me. Derek stood near the window, tacking away on his phone like he was checking something important, even though he'd already said there was no signal. The whole cabin smelled like burnt coffee and damp flannel. The light coming through the little windows felt hesitant, like it wasn't sure it belonged there at all. Brittany called over her shoulder, "You want jelly?" She was already halfway back to the stove. I said, "I'm fine," and folded my napkin slowly. You learn a lot when people think you're not paying attention. That's something my old quilting teacher once told me, back when I stitched a crooked star into a baby blanket. She looked at it and said, "You only need 3 stitches to hold something together, and 1 sharp needle." I thought about that while I buttered my toast. Later, when they stepped out for their so-called walk, which sounded more like a planning session than anything peaceful, I moved. I kept my steps light on the creaky floorboards. In the bedroom, I found a drawer that didn't pull open all the way. It stopped with a solid thunk. Not jammed, just blocked, probably locked. I noticed the scuff marks near the door, too, like someone had dragged something heavy across the floor more than once. Near the front door, I spotted fresh scratches around the lock. Not old wear, not weathered. These were new, like someone had been fiddling with it. Back at my cot, I swapped out the evening pills in my pocket with some vitamins I'd taken from the travel kit. They looked just similar enough, and the truth is, most folks don't question what an old woman swallows. Dinner was canned stew and quiet tension. I stirred mine slowly, letting the spoon click against the bowl. Then I asked, real soft, "So, how long are we planning to stay up here?" Brittany didn't even look up. She said, "Don't worry, Mom. We've got everything under control." Her voice was sweet, too sweet, like peaches that had sat on the counter too long and just starting to rot. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed still and listened through those thin cabin walls. Derek's voice was low but sharp. I heard him say, "We can't afford another delay. You said 2 weeks. We're all ready." Then a drawer slammed. Someone hissed, "Shut up." I waited another hour before I moved, every step careful, every breath quiet. I unzipped Brittany's tote bag, the one she never let go of during the day. Down at the bottom, under scarves and crumpled receipts, I found my phone. The battery had been taken out. The case was worn, smudged, but I knew it like I knew my own hands. I didn't cry, didn't panic. I put it right back, exactly how I found it. Then I reached for the cereal box. The cardboard was soft, warped from moisture. I wrote in small, tight letters, "My name is Margaret Ellis. If you find this, I need help. Cabin near Forks Creek Trail. No service. Please." I slipped the note under the porch plank, in the dip where the steps sagged in the middle. No one had swept under there in years. It wasn't much, but it was a stitch, and stitches hold. On the third day, I started humming while I cooked. It wasn't a tune anyone would know, just an old melody my grandmother used to hum when she sorted laundry. I noticed the way Brittany's mouth tightened every time I reached the same part. That was the point. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean peace. It just means permission. And I'd been quiet long enough. The rain came down all afternoon, light but steady. It slid in the cabin windows like it was trying to wash something away. Inside, the air was warm from the oven, but the tension made everything feel colder than it should have. The TV didn't work, just static. There was a stack of old board games on the shelf, still unopened. I remembered when Derek was 9 and broke the McAllister's garage window with a baseball. He cried and said it wasn't him. I covered for him, told the neighbors it was some teenagers passing through. And it hit me, standing there over the stove. Maybe that wasn't kindness. Maybe that was training. While the stew simmered, I laid down on the cot and pretended to nap. My breathing was slow, my back turned, but I kept one eye open. I saw Brittany at the table, scrolling through something on my old tablet. Her finger stopped, then moved back up. She was in my email drafts. I used to jot notes there, birthday messages I never sent, little letters I wrote but never finished. She paused on one labeled, "To Derek," unsent. I watched her lips move while she read. I didn't flinch. At dinner, I spooned the soup slowly and said, "Thank you both for taking such good care of me. I know it's not easy." Brittany blinked, then smiled, too wide, too bright. "Of course, Mom. We're just happy you're here with us." Derek cleared his throat and pushed his bowl away. "We've scheduled a nurse, just to check in, end of the week." A nurse? I let my spoon rest in the bowl. How thoughtful. He added, "I figured you'd want someone medical, just to make sure you're settled." I nodded. I suppose I should call Marla. She's been helping me with some paperwork. Brittany's spoon froze midair. You don't need that kind of stimulation. Calls can be so disorienting. I smiled and nodded like I'd forgotten what a phone was even for. That night, long after the dishes were dry and the lights had dimmed, I stepped into the hallway, pretending I was looking for my slippers. I paused near the living room. Brittany was on the couch with a file open in her lap. My file. I could see my name on the tab, underlined, bold. She was whispering into the landline. Yes, there was a landline after all. Her voice was low, sharp. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. No, the nurse knows. Just the signature left. I stepped back slow, heel to toe, like I used to when I didn't want to wake Derek as a baby. Back in the room, I sat down on the cot and opened my sock drawer. I pulled out the smallest scrap of paper I could find, and I wrote 2 names. Marla, my lawyer, Diane, my neighbor. People who knew me, people who'd never believe I left without a reason. I folded that paper into thirds, then again, and I tucked it deep into the heel of my sock. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I meant to keep it that way. If you've ever felt like the silence around you was just people choosing not to see you, then maybe you understand what I'm living through right now. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to pretend just to stay safe, or noticed things no one expected you to catch? Leave me a comment. I read every one, even if I can't always reply. And if you want to follow this little trail I'm leaving, go ahead and subscribe. I have a feeling what's coming next might surprise you. Let's find out together. They thought I was settling in, but the truth is, I was gathering, quietly, deliberately, like a squirrel before winter. Only my winter was the moment they'd hand me a pen and smile. You don't make it through motherhood without learning how to improvise. You figure out how to change a diaper on the floor of a gas station. You cook dinner with nothing but canned corn and soft potatoes. You sit through parent-teacher meetings and smile, even when your kid's the one who pushed another kid off the slide. That night, the rain had just passed. A short thunderstorm rolled through. It made the lights flicker, and the floorboards creaked like the whole house was thinking twice. The fireplace glowed low and steady. I sat with my knitting in my lap, though I wasn't really working, just counting stitches, listening. Earlier that day, I'd found the cabin's guest journal. It was shoved behind a row of old, moldy National Geographics. Most of the entries were the usual, great hike today, saw a bear, but one page stood out. Someone had drawn a map. It wasn't fancy, just pencil lines, logging trails, ranger roads, and one shortcut marked Old Logging Path, steep but fast. I ran my finger along it and memorized every turn. While Brittany was folding towels in the laundry room, I tucked 3 granola bars, 2 bandages, and a mini flashlight into my knitting tote, took them from the junk drawer and wrapped them inside a half-finished scarf to keep them quiet. Always keep a second copy of everything. My husband said that once about taxes, but it fit here too. At dinner, the tension was thick. Brittany kept glancing over at Derek. He kept checking his phone, even though we both knew it hadn't worked since day one. I acted like I didn't notice. Over cocoa, I smiled when she said the stew was delicious. I even thanked her for buying the rosemary, even though I knew that jar had been sitting in the cabin cabinet for years. Later that night, I heard them whispering by the back window. Derek said, "If she signs tomorrow, it's done. We can move forward." I wrapped my hands around my mug. It was warm and solid, and for just a second, I pictured throwing it through the glass. Instead, I took another sip. After midnight, I slipped on my rain boots and stepped outside. The pine needles were soft underfoot. They muffled everything. I knelt at the base of a tree, right where the porch light barely reached. I pulled the cereal box message from my sock, sealed it inside a sandwich bag I'd taken from the kitchen, and buried it deeper, under the root. My fingers were raw from the cold, but I didn't care. I flattened the dirt and wiped my hands clean on the edge of my nightgown. The next morning, I woke up to Derek's face right in front of mine. He was holding a clipboard. "It's time, Mom," he said. "Let's go over your living trust." I sat up slow, blinking into the sunlight. My fingers brushed my knitting bag just to make sure it was still there. And I said, real soft, "Of course, sweetheart, just let me get my glasses." But in my head, I was already tracing that old logging path. The pen was already uncapped, its tip pointed right at the blank signature line. Derek had underlined it in blue, the way realtors do when they're trying to close something fast. He smiled as he slid the clipboard toward me. I looked at him and asked nice and light if he practiced that smile in the mirror. He laughed, but it didn't touch his eyes. He thought a smile would soften the blow. It didn't. The morning was bright, strangely warm for October in Oregon. The table was cleared of everything except that thick stack of paper. Brittany stood over by the coffee pot, pretending to fuss with it, but I saw her eyes flicking toward us again and again. The smell of something burnt hung in the air. It didn't leave. I picked up the first page, careful not to let my hands shake. Derek said, "Just a minor update, streamlining things, you know. You'll still have full access." I didn't respond, just flipped through the pages slowly, nodding like I wasn't reading every word, but I was. There it was, my house, listed by address and parcel number. A whole new section on power of attorney with Derek's name in bold. My medical decisions handed over. Even a line about consent for care, already initialed in the margin. I looked up and said, "Let me take this into the other room. Just want to read without the glare." He answered with that syrupy voice of his, "Mom, it's really just a formality." I said, "I forgot my glasses, even though they were in my pocket." Brittany stepped in. "We can read it with you if that's easier. Want me to grab you a tea?" I said, "I always read what I'm signing." Then I folded the pages back together. "You taught me that, remember?" And there it was, that flicker in Derek's eyes. Just for a second, frustration. Then the smile snapped back into place. "Of course," he said, "no rush." I sat there for another minute, holding the clipboard but not looking at it. I thought about the first time Derek wrote his name, how proud he was of getting the E just right. And now, that same signature, it had become a tool to undo me. I set the pen down slowly and said, "I think I'll wait. Maybe have Marla take a look when I'm back home." Derek didn't say a word. His jaw shifted. Brittany reached for the papers too fast and knocked over her coffee mug. The sound of ceramic hitting tile rang through the room. No one flinched. I picked up my napkin and cleaned the spill. Nobody said anything. That night, I lay in bed with my back to the room, eyes wide open. The floor creaked. Derek again, pacing. I heard him pause near the living room. Then his voice, low, on the landline. "If she won't cooperate," he whispered, "we'll have to make it look like a fall." I stared at the ceiling. And right then, I knew. This wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was survival, and I wasn't done yet. After that phone call, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling beams, each one pressing down like the weight of choices I never thought I'd have to make again. My mind drifted to thread, to stitches, to every seam I'd ever pulled apart and stitched back together, stronger than before. You don't win against people like Derek by shouting. You win by outlasting them, quietly, carefully, patiently. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up outside. The trees were rustling, almost like they were whispering to each other. The leaves scratched at the windows like they wanted out too. Inside, the cabin was still. The only sound was the click-click of my knitting needles. I sat in the chair by the fireplace, where the light was best. I was working with thick wool yarn in muted green and brown. I told Brittany I was making a tea cozy. "For her mother," I said. Then added, "You mentioned her birthday's coming up," with a soft smile that didn't cost me anything, but still said a lot. Brittany looked surprised, maybe even a little touched. She said that was sweet, but her eyes didn't soften. They glanced at my hands, then to my knitting bag, and she lingered just a second too long before walking over to refill her water. What she didn't know was that beneath the top layer of that cozy, I'd stitched something else, a message. Just a few tiny words hidden in thin cotton thread that almost disappeared against the wool. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew where to look. Between the lining and the outer shell, I had slipped a note. "Help. Cabin Road 6. Alone with son. Urgent." The letters were small. The message was quiet, but it was there. I tied the seam with the kind of care only grandmothers know. I thought of my own grandmother, how she used to hide money in quilt seams during the Depression. She always told me, "Trust the thread. It'll carry you farther than fear." Later, when Brittany passed by the chair, I held out the cozy and said, "Hope she likes green. I remember you said she drinks peppermint." She nodded and told me she'd mail it first thing in the morning. I thanked her, smiled again, but inside, my heart was thudding slow and deep, like a warning bell. Later that night, I made a second copy of the message. I tucked it inside a granola bar wrapper, one I had carefully unsealed and sealed back up with a glue stick. I slid it to the bottom of my knitting tote, under the half-finished scarf. In case the cozy never made it out of the cabin, I'd have a backup. Always keep a second copy. Just as I zipped the tote closed, Derek stepped into the room. I hadn't heard his footsteps. He asked, "What are you making?" His voice was light, but his eyes were too sharp. I said, "Just keeping my hands busy," then pulled a blanket over the bag. You know me, idle hands, restless mind. He didn't answer right away, just looked at the bag, then at me. Then he smiled, too fast, and walked into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open, then close, but no footsteps came back. Later that night, after I brushed my teeth, I returned to the armchair and saw it. Something was off. The tote wasn't where I had left it. It had been moved, just slightly, but enough for me to know. So, they were watching. Good, that meant they were nervous, and that meant I still had time. I waited all day for a knock at the door. Any knock. The sound of boots on the porch, a ranger's voice, even a stranger just asking for directions. But sometimes help takes the long road, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. No knock ever came, but the wind shifted, and so did I. By evening, the storm outside had picked up. The wind howled through the trees, and the cabin groaned with every gust. The power flickered, blinking in and out like it couldn't quite decide whether to stay. I lit the small candle on the kitchen table and watched the shadows stretch across the walls. The flame danced in the window, but the only reflection I saw was my own. I opened the front door just a crack to look outside. The porch was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone. Just pine needles gathered in the corners and that same heavy silence that comes with disappointment. I shut the door slowly, careful not to let it creak. Derek and Brittany were quiet that night. Too quiet. Brittany stirred a pot of soup she never meant to serve. Derek kept checking his phone, even though there was no reception. They were waiting for something too, but not the same thing I was. I heard Brittany mention something about going into town in the morning, said she needed to check the post office. Derek gave a short nod. I sat back down in the corner chair and unfolded the map I'd copied from the old guest journal. I traced that logging trail again and again. My fingers moved from tree lines to creek beds. I counted each turn in my head, measured the distance by memory. I'm not a survivalist, but I raised 2 kids through lean years, through grief, through everything that tried to break me. That has to count for something. By candlelight, I packed my tote again. Flashlight, granola bars, dry socks, a wool scarf. I paused for a moment, then slipped in an old photo of Henry, my husband. He was smiling on the back steps of our first house. I placed it between a folded dish towel and the map, pressed it flat. After dinner, I told them I wasn't feeling great, said it might be something I ate. Brittany looked mildly concerned. Derek barely looked up. I excused myself early and took the tote with me. In the small bedroom, I locked the door from the inside, wedged a wooden chair under the knob. I knew it wouldn't hold forever, but I didn't need forever. I just needed a head start. I laid down fully dressed. My heart beat slow and steady, like it had its own rhythm, something older than fear. I whispered a promise to myself. No more waiting. At 2 a.m, I moved the chair away and opened the back door. The wind met me like an old friend, cold, wild, honest. I stepped out into it, boots sinking softly into the earth. My tote over my shoulder, the map close to my chest. No one saw me leave. That was the plan. That was the point. I didn't know how far I'd make it, but I was done surviving in someone else's story. It was time to write my own. And if you've ever had to walk away from something that once felt like home just to save yourself, maybe you understand why I didn't look back. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever done something hard, quietly, because it was the only way? Leave me a comment. I read them, especially on nights that feel too long. And if you've stayed with me through all of this, thank you, truly. There's more ahead. You're welcome to subscribe if you want to walk with me a little longer. Let's find out what happens when a woman stops waiting to be rescued and starts rescuing herself. The trees swallowed the sound of my footsteps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The wind tugged at my scarf like it was trying to warn me, but I kept going. I knew once I crossed that shallow creek, I was on my own. There's something ancient about walking alone in the woods. It's not just fear, it's clarity. Every step felt like a question, and every breath felt like an answer. The trail was barely there, just packed dirt, broken by roots and scattered leaves. My boots found the edge and followed the slope downhill, just like Henry used to say. I could still hear him telling me, if you ever get lost, follow water. It always leads somewhere someone's been. I watched for signs, moss growing thick on the north side of trees, the boulder covered in green, a long stretch of ferns, then that fallen birch tree with the bark peeling like paper. Each one showed up, just as the map had promised. My hands were aching from holding the tote, but I didn't stop. The cold had settled deep in my knees. Every step made them stiffen, but the pain felt small compared to what I was walking toward. I just kept going. And still, the memories came with me. I saw Derek at 9 years old, laughing in the kitchen, swiping frosting from the side of his birthday cake. I remembered the storm that summer night, the one that rattled the house. I'd held him close and told him everything would be fine. He believed me, and I meant it. Now, I wasn't sure either of us even knew what fine meant anymore. When the trail split, I stopped. My chest tightened. Left looked familiar. Right sloped downward, toward water. I picked the right path. 10 minutes later, I was staring at a ravine. The trail had disappeared into a mess of roots and mud. I cursed, louder than I meant to. And just like that, the trees around me went still. I turned back, reached the fork again. This time, I took the left. And then I saw it. A birch tree with something carved into the bark. R6, just like the map. By the time the sky began to pale, I saw the shape of a small structure through the trees. It was old, wooden, leaning a little. The windows were boarded, but still intact. Maybe a ranger's outpost? Maybe something else. It didn't matter. It was something. I pushed the door. It groaned, but opened. Inside, there was dust and silence. A cot no one had used in years, a broken lantern on the floor, and in the corner, a shelf. On that shelf was a radio, covered in grime, but whole. My hands were shaking, not from the cold this time, but from something closer to hope. I wiped the dust off the panel, found the switch, pressed it once, nothing. Pressed it again. Then a crackle, static. A faint hum, broken but alive. My breath caught. I turned a knob slowly. The sound shifted. Then a voice. "Repeat your message. Over." My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the table to keep myself upright. I hadn't spoken yet. I hadn't even thought about what to say. But someone was there. Someone was listening. I swallowed hard, leaned toward the mic. My voice came out small but steady. "My name is Margaret Ellis. I need help. I've been held against my will. Cabin near Ridge 6 Trail. Please, over." More static. Then silence. Then I heard it. "Copy that. Stay on the line." I gripped the edge of the unit, knuckles white. Someone out there had heard me, and now everything could change. I'd never used a radio before, but I'd made wedding cakes in kitchens without ovens, without mixers, just heat, patience, and stubborn hands. I could figure this out. The buttons were stiff from age, their labels worn down. I pressed one, then another. Static, a crackle, nothing. Then I held the main switch a little longer and spoke. My voice broke into the silence. "This is Margaret Ellis. I need help." There was nothing at first, just a pause. Then I heard it, that low hum that meant something was listening. A voice came through, calm, female, steady like someone trained to stay calm when it mattered. "Copy that, Margaret. Can you give your location?" I closed my eyes and saw the map in my mind, the one I'd memorized like a prayer. Logging trail off Ridge 6, past a fallen birch, ranger shack with boarded windows, creek to the west, slope to the south. Understood. Stay where you are. We're dispatching a team now. Keep the channel open. My knees gave out. I slid to the floor, laughing and crying into my scarf. The wood beneath me smelled like mildew and old boots, but at that moment, it was the safest place on earth. I curled up in the corner, pulled a dusty wool blanket around me, and held onto my tote. Inside was everything that mattered: food, socks, flashlight, the photo of Henry, and my name stitched into the lining like a prayer. I wasn't just someone's mother, I was someone. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm not deadweight." The wind rattled the boards around me, and for a second, it felt like it whispered back. A second voice came through the radio. This one was male, breathless. "Tell her we're 30 minutes out." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until then. 30 minutes. I could make it 30 more. Then I saw something, just a flicker through the crack in the wall, a flash of blue-gray between the trees. A shape, then gone. But something about the slope of the shoulders, the way he walked. Derek's jacket. I froze. Had he followed me, or was I seeing shadows built from fear and exhaustion? I edged closer to the wall and held my breath. No footsteps, no voice calling my name, just the stillness. So I stayed quiet, too quiet. Then the radio crackled again. "Margaret, do you copy?" I pressed the button with shaking fingers. "I'm still here." "Good. Just stay inside, lock the door if you can. We're coming." I couldn't lock it, not really, but I pushed a chair under the handle and slid the cot across the floor, sat with my back to the wall, trying to slow my breathing. And then I remembered something I told a girl once, back when I used to teach quilting in the church basement. I'd said, "Mistakes aren't failing, they're just part of the pattern." I smiled at the memory, thinking of her, thinking of myself. I wasn't broken. I was being restitched, and I wasn't alone anymore. They found me just as the sun began breaking through the trees. One of the rescuers knelt beside me, her breath fogging up as she checked my pulse. I looked down at my hands. They were dirty, they were trembling, but they were still mine. I hadn't run just to survive. I ran to remember who I was. In the ambulance, I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared out the back. The pine trees blurred past like old regrets, tall and unmoved. I didn't cry, not then. The clinic in town smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee that had sat too long. A nurse named Jody tucked the blanket around me again and said I was lucky. I told her I was deliberate. She asked if I had any injuries. I said, not the kind you could see. They offered tests, a hospital bed. I said no. What I needed was a lawyer. An hour later, Marla showed up, sharp coat, warm eyes. She didn't press me, just sat and let me talk. I told her about the folder in the drawer, the radio call, the signatures they pushed, the message I stitched into yarn and cereal wrappers. She listened, steady and calm. She asked if I had documented everything. I told her yes. She leaned in and said, "Then they'll answer for it." When Diane came to pick me up, she didn't say a word, just opened the car door and helped me in like it was any regular Tuesday. We drove through Eugene's wide streets, the kind with sycamore trees and slow traffic lights. Eventually, she spoke. "You're staying with me, no arguments." And I didn't argue. Her house was just like I remembered. The front porch still creaked in the same spot. The coat rack by the door still leaned left. In the kitchen, I saw it, the old tea tin I'd given her last Christmas, Earl Grey with lavender. The smell hit me, and something in my chest cracked. I turned away fast, but she saw. She said I could let it out if I needed to. I nodded, but I didn't. Not yet. That night, while she made soup and played soft jazz like always, I sat at her table and went through what I had left. At the bottom of my tote, I found the granola bar wrapper with my message, the dispatch transcript Jody had printed, 2 small things I had created when everything else was being taken from me. I put them in a padded envelope and mailed them to myself, quietly, just as a marker, proof that I existed. The next morning, I sat in Diane's sunroom with a warm cup of tea, surrounded by old furniture that didn't need anything from me. Diane stepped in with her knitting, then paused. She asked, "What now?" I told her I didn't know, but I wasn't going back to being quiet. She nodded once. That was enough. And now I'm here, telling you all this, because I want to ask you something. It's simple, but it's not easy. What would you do if your own child tried to erase you, not just from the paperwork, but from memory itself? Don't answer me now. Just think about it. And if you're still here, still listening, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. I still remember the sound of that radio crackling, how a stranger's voice broke through the silence I'd been trapped in, not just in the woods, but inside my own life. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the running, it's standing up again after someone told you you don't matter. But we do matter. Even when they try to dismiss us, even when they call us too old or too much, our truth still carries weight. And that quiet strength we've held inside for so long, it can move mountains the moment it's finally spoken. If any part of this touched something in you, I'd love to hear your story too. Tell me, have you ever had to prove you were still you, even when someone else stopped seeing it? And if you're ready for another story, next time I'll tell you about the night my daughter cut my hair while I was sleeping and told her guests I needed to be committed. Let's just say that one didn't end with scissors.